Hello again. The idea of global warming and climate change is tremendously popular in Britain at the moment. It is behind all kinds of things, from the replacement of petrol driven cars to the abolition of gas cookers. Why is it that we should be so preoccupied with this strange idea while most of the world, let's say Africa, Asia and South America, simply ignore it? There's no sign of the Chinese closing down their coal mines anytime soon, and they're still building plenty of uh, power stations which burn coal. So is India for that matter, and the picture is much the same elsewhere in the world outside Europe. Why is it that we have become so keen on the idea? Part of the explanation is that this whole narrative is an exceedingly ancient one for Europeans, and because it is so familiar, we feel at the back of our minds there must be something in it, especially when it's tricked out in modern scientific language. The destruction of the human race, caused by their selfishness and greed, is a marvellously mythic theme and appeals to something very deep within us. We will be punished for our wickedness by rising sea levels until our great cities are flooded. What a grand idea. Of course, 3,000 years ago, much the same story was circulating. Humanity had become so wicked and did whatever they pleased with no thought about right or wrong. And then look what happened. The sea went on rising until it covered the highest mountains. It rose until it was about 7 metres above the tops of the mountains. Every living being on the earth died. How's that for rising sea levels? This, of course, is the myth of the Great Flood, which we find in the biblical book of Genesis. It was the judgment upon the human race in those days for not changing their ways and taking proper care of the environment. If only they had repented and covered themselves in sackcloth and ashes and stopped using so much oil and gas, it need never have happened. This is the myth, that is to say the Great Flood, the deluge myth, upon which our modern fears are founded. We hear echoes of it when we are told that the weather is changing because of global warming and there'll be howling winds and torrential rain, or perhaps fire from heaven which will dry up all our crops. Whenever you hear about rising sea levels and the idea that London and New York will eventually be drowned beneath the oceans, it is this which has caused that anxiety. The attraction of this mythic narrative is, of course, that the rising sea levels and destruction of our cities will be precipitated by mankind's own behaviour. It will be a judgment upon us for our thoughtlessness and the way that we have been despoiling the planet without caring for the future. We can avert the wrath to come only by making amends and going without things. We must go without gas-fired central heating in the winter, for example, and that will be part of our penance. We must give up our cars, and that too will show our repentance. We must stop flying off on foreign holidays and do without such luxuries, because that too is apt to bring judgment down upon us. Of course, there have been other threatened disasters, worldwide disasters that is, in recent years, but none have caught on the way that global warming has. None of them have captured our imagination in quite that way. Probably because they are more random and not likely to be brought about simply by our behaviour. In the 1990s, a comet crashed into Jupiter, the Schumacher-Levy comet, in 96. And that sparked off the fear that a comet or asteroid would strike the Earth and destroy us. This was the theme of some Hollywood disaster movies at that time, and more recently we've had films like Greenland and Don't Look Up exploiting the same idea. This danger, though, is not as attractive as the climate change disaster because, in the first place, it is not brought about by human actions and human wickedness. Secondly, there is no way to ward off such a disaster, whereas with climate change we can stop it by repenting of our evil ways and showing that we are sorry. The climate change narrative is a religion for our times, and it has the great advantage of being a secular faith, one which needs no God. All one needs is faith and a willingness to change one's way of life and deny oneself luxuries. This self-denial makes some people feel virtuous, and going without certain foods because producing them is bad for the environment is no different from fasting or giving up chocolate for Lent, as people did only a few years ago. Just imagine a religion without God, by which one can find peace and absolution and save your fellow beings from destruction into the bargain. I quite see the attraction of this religion or cult, or call it what you will, even if I decline to join it.